Welcome to the Manders Mindset Podcast. Here you'll find both monologue and interviews of entrepreneurs, coaches, healers, and a variety of other people, where your host Amanda Russo will discuss her own mindset and perspective, and her guest mindset and perspective on the world around us. Manders and her guests will help explain to you how shifting your mindset will shift your life.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Manders Mindset. I'm your host, Amanda Russo, and I'm here today with Shanell Lavery. And now, I met Shanell, I don't know how long ago it's been now, but I took a Kundalini Yoga class with her, and I loved it. It was very different than any other yoga class I had ever experienced. And I've been doing yoga for about 10 years and tried Kundalini for the first time probably about a year ago. We'll get a little more into what exactly that is, but I'm here with Shanell today. And my first question for you is, so who is Shanell?
Who is Shanell? What a great question to start with. I don't know. I'm still figuring it out. So I'm a really easygoing person, and my main goal in life since I was a kid was to just help people. And I know that sounds really corny, but I have always had this like nurturing or caregiver spirit. And I'm also an empath. I feel everything. And so really my goal in life and who I am as a person is a helper, somebody that's there to just either make people feel better or to be a helping hand when they need it. I'm also a mom though, and a wife and a whole bunch of other things, but I think helper is the most important.
Okay, I love that. That's beautiful. So now you teach yoga currently, correct?
Yes, I do.
Is that your full-time job? Do you do something else?
So yoga and meditation is part-time. It's, I guess, side hustle, as a lot of people call it. So full-time, I work as a program manager, and I've been doing that now for about 7 years.
Okay. And what do you do as a program manager?
So as a program manager, so I actually manage a program of law school students, and our students represent prisoners in different types of hearings. So they are doing legal work. I do everything behind the scenes to make sure that they're able to do the work that they do. I love my job because, for starters, every year is different because there's a new set of students that comes in, and that I get to see students at the beginning of their legal career. So I really get to help them learn not only about the legal aspects of what to expect in the real world, but also about the real world aspects, right? So I get to bring my full self to work. I get to be sometimes a mom, sometimes a yoga and meditation teacher, a lot of times a manager. So it's a lot of fun, and I'm so grateful for the work that I get to do.
Wow, that's awesome. Okay. So I'm curious, how did you first get into yoga?
That is a great question. So I've always been like a dabbler where like I like to try different things. And yoga was one of those things where like you see people doing yoga, but I'm not really flexible. And so I felt very intimidated to go to a yoga class. The first time I ever went, it was a beginner's series. So I felt comfortable because I knew everybody else there would be a beginner. And honestly, the first class that I ever took, I just felt different afterwards. Like I felt calmer. I felt really good because I had moved my body, and I knew that it was something that I wanted to do again. But because of who I am, I didn't go back for a really long time. And I think part of it is just because like I find these things that I really like, but if I don't feel 100% confident in it, then it takes me a little while. So flash forward to about 5 or 6 years ago, And again, like I was really feeling the need to do something where I could move my body, but also get some stress relief. And I was scrolling on Instagram and I came across this free challenge, like a free, like 5-day challenge. And I signed up for it. But for the first time, I actually put it on my calendar and I said, you know what, I'm going to show up every day for 5 days. And so that was the first time that I did Kundalini Yoga. And it just felt different in my body than the regular yoga because I didn't feel like I had to perform and be perfect, but I could also still get a lot of benefits out of it. So from there, like I was totally hooked. I signed up for every class that I could find. And yeah, it's been so much fun ever since.
Wow. Okay. And now, how long ago was that?
That was like five or six, probably. Oh gosh, maybe it was like 6 or 7 years ago now. Oh gosh.
Okay. Wow. And so when did you make the transition from just being a yoga student to teaching yoga?
So I practiced consistently for a couple of years. I practiced Kundalini consistently for a couple of years. So in the Kundalini tradition, there's a really, we talk a lot about consistency, right? Because if you do something one time, it's like, okay, great, it feels good. But if you're consistent in it, it really starts to change who you are at your core. And so when I first started practicing, I immediately dove in and was like, I have to do this every day. And so I'm not really a morning person. So the way that I made it work for me is I said, I'll practice every day as long as I do it before I go to bed. And somehow I made it consistent where I didn't miss a day, probably for a few months, every single day of practicing yoga and meditation. And so once I got consistent in the practice and I really started to learn more about like the background and why we do certain things in the practice, I knew that it was something that I wanted to dive deeper into because I'm a total nerd. I like to really like learn about the science, but also this kind of spiritual aspect. And so I signed up for teacher training, but not really knowing that I would necessarily teach. It was more of just for my personal growth. But then I think COVID happened and a lot of things in the world were changing and everybody was going digital. So I was like, okay, you know what? Let me try and see if I can make this work. And I did, and people started to sign up for my classes. And I had so much fun creating content online that it stuck. And now I'm really grateful because I'm not only teaching online, but I'm also teaching in person, which is a whole new adventure. And I've just been having fun. So yeah, it's been a couple of years of fun.
Wow. No, that's awesome. I love that. So can you discuss a little bit more in depth what Kundalini Yoga is and some of the differences in Kundalini versus other types of yoga?
Yeah, of course. So I will say there's a lot of similarities. Obviously, yoga is yoga, and yoga, the meaning of the word yoga is union, or actually it's yoke, but it really means union. And to me, that could mean a whole bunch of different things. That could mean union as in people coming together, but it could also mean union like within yourself. And to me, that's bringing together the mind, the body, the spirit, and all the aspects of yourself into one like beautiful package, right? So Kundalini, it's called the yoga of awareness. And to me, what you're doing when you're practicing Kundalini is you're doing a bunch of different things. So in a typical yoga class, you're mostly moving your body, right? Like obviously you're going to breathe because you have to breathe, but you're mostly focused on the movements. Whereas in Kundalini, you're also doing the movements, but you're bringing in the breath. You're bringing in mantra or words. You are bringing in a whole bunch of different things into the practice. And to me, it's this beautiful union of mind, body, and spirit where you really get the physical benefits of it because there's some classes where like you sweat the entire time, right? So you're getting those physical benefits, but you're also able to tap into spirituality if that's something that you're into. You are tapping into stress relief or like anxiety relief, which I think a lot of us need. You are tapping into calming the nervous system. So to me, it's a really beautiful practice, and I think I dove into it because I am very anxious. I am an overthinker, and I never found something where I could fully get into it because I was constantly like in my head, right? And so if your head is going or your mind is going, it's really hard for me to sit and just be quiet and breathe sometimes. And so when you start to bring in movement to that, right? Now I'm like focused on what my body's doing. I'm not really focused on what's happening in my mind. And so it really helped me to drop in more. Yeah, it's a really beautiful practice, but I will say, if you Google it, like it can be very intimidating sometimes to see like some of the images because you see like people in all white, right? Like that was the first thing that I saw. I was like, why is everybody in white? I like to wear black. Like I don't like to wear white, right? And so like it kind of was a turnoff at first. But then you learn why people wear white, right? And so white, as an example, you wear white because it helps to make your aura larger. And so it helps you to seem more radiant to those that see you, right? So I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But by just Googling it, I was like, I don't know about that. But yeah, I really love it. And I really encourage people to give it a try because it's one of those things where you don't really know how you're going to feel about it until you try it. And even honestly, in the midst of some of the classes, and you can probably speak to this, sometimes you're doing stuff and you're like, okay, this is weird. Like, why am I moving my body like this? But by the end of the class, you're like, okay, like I feel different, right? So even though it felt weird, I feel really good. But yeah, I don't know. It was a very long answer, but
no worries.
I answered the question.
No, you did. No worries at all. Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I completely agree with you. How it is, it's almost hard to explain, but it's different than any other type of yoga. Because I've really done vinyasa, I've done hot yoga, I don't even know all the names of them, but I've done a lot of them. And then when I did that, I was like, huh.
Yeah.
Like you definitely feel different after, but it's like, that was a yoga class.
Yeah.
Like, so I
definitely. Yeah. And the other thing too, which you just reminded me of, one of the differences too is that we do things usually for a specific amount of time, right? So in Kundalini, if you're practicing traditional Kundalini, there's a lot of emphasis on numbers, right? So I mentioned earlier about consistency. So usually consistency means practicing something every day for 40 days, right? And in a class, usually you're doing practices for 3 minutes or 11 minutes, but it's very specific. And so we do something called a kriya. A kriya is a set of exercises for a specific purpose. And if you follow the kriya as written, it will tell you, you do posture number 1 for 2 minutes, you do posture number 2 for 1 minute, right? And so part of that is because once you put all of that together, it is helping, whatever benefit you're getting from that kriya. So it could be anything from a physical benefit, like helping your back, or like abdominal strengthening, but it could also be something a little bit more like higher level or spiritual, like manifesting money or learning how to pray or, the nervous system, right? Like the possibilities are endless. There's literally thousands of kriyas. But that's what I like is that, like, at least as from the teacher perspective, I don't have to necessarily think too hard, right? Like I just have to come up with the feeling that I want my students to have by the end of the class. And then I can pick and choose the kriya and the meditation and the breath work based on kind of what theme I'm going with. But yeah, that is one thing that is a little bit different than like a typical class.
Okay. So now you mentioned they say you should do something every day for 40 days. Is there a reason behind the 40 days?
Yeah. So, and now granted, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to do anything for 40 days. But if you want to do it for 40 days, the reason why they say 40 days is they say that it takes 40 days to break or change habits, right? So once you start to practice something for 40 days, think about the first like few days, right? Like just think about like New Year's resolutions in that first week of January, everybody is in the gym, right? But by like week 2 or 3, there's less people in the gym because it starts to get harder. So when you commit to doing something for 40 days and you are consistent in it, number one, you're proving to yourself that when I tell myself that I'm going to do something, I do it. And so that's like a mood boost, right? Like you feel really good about that. But then once you start to do it over and over and over again, by like week 2, you have to really fight to get out of bed and to do your practice because there's so many other things that you'd rather do. But if you keep going and you're consistent, by day 40, you feel really accomplished. Maybe you have broken a habit that you were, that you didn't want to hold on to any longer. And sometimes maybe you choose to go longer. But to me, I think that's the beginning part, is that really changing habits and setting an example to yourself that you can do something consistently.
Wow, no, that's great. I think that builds a lot of self-confidence as well.
It does. It does. It really does. Exactly.
So would you say Kundalini has helped you with increasing habits or removing bad habits?
Definitely. Well, for starters, I was never consistent. Like I said in the beginning, I always wanted to practice yoga because I knew about the benefits, right? Like we know that it's really good for our physical body. We also know that it's really good to help us be calmer or whatever it may be, right? But I was never consistent. I think part of it was because of that intimidation factor where I felt like, okay, like if I'm not doing this posture right, like it's not going to work, right? And so I just wouldn't do it. And so being a part of this Kundalini journey, honestly, it has taught me that I can commit to something, right? Like if I say I'm going to do it, I do it. I've done like 40-day challenges either by myself or with others a bunch of times. And every time that I do it, I feel something new and different in me. I discover new things about me that I didn't really realize before. And it does help to build your confidence because like it's like when you write down a to-do list, right? And you get to check something off, you feel that like that really good feeling that you feel. And so the more that you get to show up and check something off your list that has a lot of benefits to it, the better you feel. And it really does start to spill out into other areas of your life. So it's not just for me because I'm showing up better for my kids and for my partner. Like I'm more consistent. I feel better. I'm more present, right? So to me, it makes me overall just a better version of me, honestly.
No, that makes a lot of sense. That's awesome. So now you touched a little bit about a Kriya and that you get your information that you're sharing in the class from that. Can you elaborate on that? Like what?
Of course I will. Yeah. So a typical Kundalini class will have a combination of some kind of breath practice, some kind of meditation, and some kind of Kriya. And so the Kriya is a specific set of postures or movements, asana, for a specific purpose. So just like if you went to a typical yoga class, right, you would do sun salutations. So sun salutations is kind of an example of what a Kriya is because you do the same postures in the same order every time that you do a sun salutation. So in Kundalini, as an example, one of the Kriyas that I've been doing lately is called the nervous system overhaul. And so it's, I forget how many postures. Let's say it's 8 postures. So it's 8 postures that I'm doing for a specific amount of time. And in the end, it's helping my nervous system. It's actually also helping my abs and my back and my legs. So you're getting a lot of benefits out of it. But yeah, so if you look up a Kundalini Kriya, you can see the different postures. You can see how long to do it for, but it also will explain to you why you're doing it, like the benefits of that specific practice.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So it seems it's much more structured.
It's much more structured, definitely.
Okay. Now, did you get into meditating around the same time you got into yoga?
Yes, I did. So meditation is kind of the same as yoga, where like I was a dabbler, I was curious. The first time that I actually, well, no, that's not true, because I did meditations in like school, right? Like they would have us do like quiet meditation sometimes. But when I had a job and the company had like a staff session on meditation, and that was the first time that I really learned what mindfulness is, right? But again, I learned what mindfulness is, but I did not stick with the practice. And so I didn't really stick with meditation consistently until I started doing Kundalini. And that's a lot of that is because some of the meditations are quiet, where you're just sitting and breathing, but a lot of the meditations are moving meditations where you're breathing, but you also may be moving your arms or saying words. And it helped me to be consistent because it was, I don't know, it just gave me the things that I needed that like helped me to feel good. Like I like to sing, right? So if you give me a meditation where I get to sing, like I'm in my happy place. But yeah, so I guess Kundalini yoga and meditation go hand in hand when it comes to me and my consistent practice.
Okay. So, couple questions off of that.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what type of job was it that they taught you about mindfulness and meditation?
So I worked at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, a long time ago. And so they just had all different types of sessions for staff, and one of them happened to be about mindfulness and meditation. And I think because it was MIT, we definitely talked a lot about the scientific benefits of the practice. And I think that's the part that really gets me. I think it's one thing if you tell me like, okay, this is going to make you feel good. Like, all right, cool. But if you can also tell me like what's happening in my brain and how it's helping my heart or whatever it may be, I think I get more out of it because I really like to know how things work and why things work. But yeah, it was a really cool session. Like I still remember it to this day, and it probably was like over 15 years ago.
Wow. No, that's cool that they even offered that.
Yeah.
So you said you learned what mindfulness was.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious, what would you say mindfulness is?
To me, mindfulness is the practice of coming back to the present moment. I think mindfulness is really simple. I think sometimes we try to complicate things. But to me, that's what it is. It's the goal of it is to help you just come back to what's happening right here and right now. And one of the simplest ways that you can do that is by focusing on your breath and focusing on the inhale and the exhale, whether that's the physical inhale, exhale, and feeling it in your body, or maybe you're just saying it in your mind, in and out, in and out. But that simple practice helps you to tune in to what's happening now. And what that does is that can help relieve stress, because when we're stressed and anxious, we're either generally focusing on things that have happened, right? Like, I don't know about you, but like, I'm that person that will relive a moment that happened 3 weeks ago. Like, oh my goodness, why did I say that? Or I'm thinking ahead to something that I can't really control because it hasn't happened yet. So the idea with mindfulness is we're coming back to right now, right? And right now I'm safe, I'm warm, I'm full, like I ate, like I feel good, right? And so that in itself just helps to calm us down so that we can live our lives and not be super anxious all the time.
No, that makes complete sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious. A lot of people talk about how they've had an aha moment or a turning point in their life where something changed. Maybe it was a life event, but they realized something different, either about themselves, about their life, about the world. Would you say you've had an aha moment?
I've had several aha moments. I've had several aha moments. Now, also, I'm 38. I'm going to be 39 in less than a month, right? So, like, I've had some time. I've had some life experience. So I think I've had several, but I will say for sure the biggest aha moment is becoming a parent for the first time. And that realization that you are letting me take care of this child, right? Like, I have no training. There's no manual. Well, there technically are books, right? But like, you just all of a sudden go from not being a parent to being a parent in a second, right? And so now I have this little person that needs me to feed them and keep them warm and clothed and all that, right? So to me, I think that was the beginning of like the aha moment. But it's only been more fun since then.
Okay. Why do you say that was your aha moment?
Because I think I think from then my life, like my day-to-day decisions and actions, they don't just affect me anymore. Now they affect my children. Because now I have two of them. So now they affect my children. And I think the more that you learn about development and all of that stuff, right? One thing that I learned a long time ago is that the first 7 years of your child's life are kind of the most important, right? Because that's when they're going through a lot of these developmental milestones. And so, like, for me, I'm like, oh my goodness, the pressure. Like, I have to make, their childhood just amazing. And so, one thing that I really wanted to do when my kids were young is to teach them about mindfulness and about like having awareness of their body and awareness of their breath, because even for kids get stressed too, right? Like, kids are living in the same world. My kids lived through like a pandemic just like we did. And I can only imagine, it was hard as an adult. I can only imagine what that's like as a child. So it's a lot of pressure. So yeah, it was definitely like a wake up call for sure.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I am not a parent myself, but I can only imagine that.
Yeah, definitely.
But it definitely was. So I'm curious if you have any tips or advice for any of the listeners who are trying to achieve a different goal of theirs, trying to go after a passion of theirs, and they're struggling to make it happen. Maybe it's lack of consistency, or maybe it's procrastination, whatever it may be. I'm curious if you have any advice for anybody in that.
I do. I do. And such a great question. So, my number one word of advice is, if you have a dream, a goal, or anything, a passion, write it down, right? It doesn't have to be anything like complicated, but write it down. Get a notebook, get a journal, get a piece of paper, post it, and write it down. It's funny, I say that because I had a goal, an income goal, right? Like, I really wanted to make this amount of money, and I wrote it down. The only thing on the post-it was that amount of money. And I wrote it down, I stuck it somewhere, and I forgot about it. And flash forward years later, and I get an email that I'm getting a salary increase, and it was exactly the amount that I wrote down on that paper, right? So, not to say that it's magical, right? But even that act of writing it down, to me, that makes that dream now you're making it official, because it's not just in your head. Now it's something that's concrete, right? So that's number one. Number two, for any goal, dream, habit change, whatever it is, start small. So I think, like, I struggle with procrastination. And so for me, it's really hard to like look at the big picture, because I start to get really overwhelmed by like whatever it is that I'm trying to do. So instead, I like to break things down into tiny little increments, and I like to work for short periods of time. So my day-to-day thing is I work for 25 minutes at a time on one thing. So I set a timer. I say, okay, I'm going to work on this one thing. Like, let's say it's a social media post, right? For 25 minutes, I'm only going to work on that. I'm not going to scroll. I'm not going to, go and make a coffee or anything. Like, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to get this done. But what happens is if I do that one thing every day for 25 minutes, even if it's just the 25 minutes a day, right? It's going to add up. And eventually that adds up to hours, right? Or days or weeks. So if you struggle with consistency, start small, and then that way you'll start to get that momentum that will help you to spend more and more time on it. But yeah, those are my 2 words of wisdom. Write it down and start small.
Okay, well, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
I'm curious, is there a reason behind the 25 minutes?
There is. So it's actually called the Pomodoro technique. And it's a really good technique for people that struggle with procrastination or focus. I discovered it a few years ago because I struggle with both of those things. And having social media, doing all, I want to be everywhere at once and I can't, because I have stuff to do. And so I discovered this technique. And so what you do is it's 25 minutes of work. So for 25 minutes, you pick 1 or 2 things. Like, let's say, if I'm at work, it might be like answering emails, right? So for 25 minutes, all I'm going to do is answer emails. And then you take a 5-minute break. So you get your 25 minutes of work done, then you get 5 minutes. So you can go stretch, you can go make that coffee, you can scroll on TikTok for a couple of minutes, and then you go back in for another 25 minutes. And so what I like about that is, like, in a work day, I can do a few blocks of those 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off, and you can get a lot done in 25 minutes, honestly. And so if you're doing a few of those a day, it really starts to add up.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
I thought you might have been referencing that, but I wasn't.
Okay.
100%.
Yeah.
I didn't want to assume.
Not mine. Yeah.
I didn't want to assume you were referencing that, but
Yeah,
I thought you might have been. Okay. So I'm a little curious about if we could take a little bit of a backtrack. So we kind of talked about your career, yoga, what you do. I'm a little curious about your upbringing and your childhood and kind of how you got to where you are now. Whatever you're comfortable with sharing on that.
Yeah. So again, another great question. So I had a very interesting childhood, in that I feel like I had to grow up pretty quickly. I definitely had some moments in my childhood, like traumatic moments, some crazy moments, right? But I will say the consistent factor in all of that, even when things felt really tough and rough, I had one person in my life that was always there and kept pushing me, and that was my grandmother. And she believed in education. Like, number one was education. If you have your education, everything else just falls into place, right? And so because of her, I always went to really good schools. I always did like all kinds of fun activities. Like, I learned how to play the piano at a really young age, and I did sports. And I think, to me, I realized, like, education really is important, right? And I think because of that, everything else has just kind of fallen into place. It's definitely been a roller coaster, though, because those moments from my childhood, those hard moments, continued on into adulthood. But even through that, I think I've always been a helper. I've always been motivated, and I've always been really resilient. And I think those 3 things have helped me to get to where I am now, because even when moments were rough, or even when, like, the job applications weren't, going where I wanted them to go, I would just keep going until I got to where I want to be. Like, as an example, even now, the job that I have, I don't know how I got it. Like, to be honest with you, like sometimes I'm like, I don't know how I made it here. So I work at Harvard University, and when I first started working there, I had no degree. I had like no experience, but I was really motivated, right? I was really motivated to work there because it's a really good place to work, and I wanted to go back to school. And I knew if I worked there, I would be able to go to school for almost free, right? And so that's just an example, right? Like I had no business applying to these jobs, but I did it anyway. And something happened where the right person saw my application at the right time and I got the job. Um, and so I never let things stop me. Like even if it's, even with yoga and meditation, I don't think I'm the typical yoga and meditation instructor. I'm not really that flexible. Like, but again, like I don't let things stop me. Once I have my mind set on something, I'm getting it done. And I think thankfully that has led me to where I am now, which is a really happy, healthy place, and I love it.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Thank you.
I love that.
Thank you.
So most people would consider themselves to have principles for their life. Everybody's are usually pretty different, but I'm curious if you could tell us what you consider your top 3 principles and why.
Oh my goodness. Okay. I have no idea. Let me think. Okay. My top 3 principles. So I think my number 1 principle, and I don't know if this is consistent with what other people would say, but I think my number 1 principle in life is fun. Because I feel really grateful to be here right now during this time, so like I think we deserve to have fun. You can have hard moments, but you can still make fun somewhere, right? And I want to teach my kids that live your life. Like there's no point in like being bored and whatever. Like have fun if you can. Number 2, I would say, is probably mindfulness, because I talk a lot about stress and anxiety and overcoming hard moments. And I think a lot of that comes from being able to tune in to the present moment and what's happening right here and right now. And let's see, number 3. Ooh, this is a hard one. Number 3, I would say wellness. And what I mean when I say wellness is I mean mental wellness and making a point of taking care of what's happening in your mind. So like therapy is really good, or finding things that help to make you feel good, whatever it is, working out, reading, breath work. So mental wellness, physical wellness. So really making sure that you take care of your vessel. So, eating delicious and healthy foods, moving your body consistently, and then spiritual wellness. So whatever it is that helps you to feel connected to something beyond you, whether or not you believe in God, because it doesn't have to be God, but just there's, something outside of yourself. I think those 3 things are really important: is the mental, the physical, and the spiritual.
Wow, okay. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yes, you got me on the spot. I just came up with that, so I hope.
No, that makes sense. I get it. So I have one more question for you. Okay. So I wanted to approach the podcast in a way where it wasn't only questions from me. So I had asked one of my best friends to come up with a question that I could ask any podcast guest. She had no idea who I would be asking this to. So her question was, what has been the best decision you've made in your life up until now, and why?
Whew. That is a hard question. Oh, okay. What is the best decision I have made? Um, that's your best friend. It's a really good question. It's really hard to come up with one thing. So, and I don't want to like leave anybody out, right? Like, I feel like I want to get everybody into this answer, but that's really hard to do. But honestly, I think one of the best decisions that I've made so far is so my wife and I, we have been married now for, oh my goodness, we're coming up on 12 years of marriage. We've been together for 15 years. And honestly, I think accepting the invitation for that first date was probably one of the best decisions I made because I was totally like stepping out of my, I guess, comfort zone, right? Like she's unlike anybody that I dated before. But we've had so much fun in the last 15 years and we have two beautiful kids. So for sure, I think that's probably one of the best decisions I've made.
Aw, I love that. That's beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I am curious, is there anything, no pressure whatsoever, but is there anything you want to leave the listeners with? Anything else you want to say before we close out? Again, no pressure whatsoever.
Okay. I think the one thing that I will say to whoever is listening to this right now, one thing that I teach in my classes and whenever I work with anybody is about strength, right? And so I've talked about like my story and, we've talked a lot about yoga and meditation. But I think the most important thing to know is that we are really strong, right? Each of us are strong in our own individual ways. And I think learning how to tap into that strength and gratitude for that strength is really, really important. So whatever it is, like I really recommend finding whatever that thing is that makes you feel good, that makes you feel strong, that makes you feel like you can take on anything. Do more of that. And if you do more of that, the things that help you feel good, the things that light you up, then it will start to pour into all aspects of your life, to the people that you come into contact with, and we can just have more good in the world.
Wow. Okay. Well, thank you.
Of course. Thank you.
Of course. So now, if anybody is looking to connect with you, where can they find you?
The best place to find me is on Instagram at This Mama Meditates. That is where I share yoga and meditation and honestly just things to help you smile and make you feel good. So find me there.
Okay, and I will share that in the show notes as well. She also does teach classes in person at 4-5 Wellness in East Providence. Are you anywhere else in person? I'm not sure.
Not yet. I'm at 4-5 Wellness, and I also do private sessions. So if anybody wants a private session of yoga or meditation or both, you can just DM me.
Okay, sounds good. Well, thank you so much for being on Mander's Mindset. I really appreciate your time and all the wisdom you shared with the listeners.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. And thank you all for listening to another episode of Mander's Mindset. Again, I'm your host, Amanda Russo. And until next time, guys, if you enjoyed this episode, if you could give me a 5-star rating, leave a review, and subscribe to the show, I'd appreciate it. And it would help me get the podcast out to more people. Thanks, guys.